Hi, Harvie.
Konnichiwa.
Konnichiwa. Can you tell me about New York experience as a jazz musician in 1974?
Okay. If any of you out there have been to New York now or in the past few years, New York was a completely different place. It's like it was another city. It wasn't the same at all. And the differences are so many that I could not talk about all of them. But I did want to talk about the first thing, and it's about the laws that were in New York that made it very strange for musicians.
Yeah.
See, all this started around the early part of the 1900s, when basically they looked upon dancing and going to nightclubs, and plus there was prohibition. They looked on that as being a very bad thing. A lot of people think that it was racially motivated because they didn't want black people dancing with white people. And so they were really regulating dancing. So there was a law that you needed a special license to dance, and you could actually go to jail if you danced in a club without a license, and some people did. So eventually what happened was they came up with a law, I don't remember all the dates, but it was around in the 50s, where if you worked in a place that served alcohol without a license, there was no dancing, and if you worked there, you had to have a special license which allowed you to work there. Now, to get this license, you have to have not been going to jail. If you were in prison or in jail, then you couldn't get the license, so you couldn't work. So many great jazz musicians, Chet Baker, Billie Holiday, Charlie Parker, some of the greatest jazz musicians ever, could not work in a nightclub in New York City.
Wow.
They could play in a concert hall, or they could play anywhere that didn't serve alcohol.
I see.
But they were not allowed to have a cabaret card, and they could go to jail if they were to play. And the place they work at would be closed. So it was kind of a very bad situation. So that's a little of the history. And so then the law changed. There's no more cabaret as about 1971. Right before I moved to New York, they finally changed that quite truthfully stupid law. And but they didn't stop being stupid. They started more stupid things. They came up with a law that if you play in a place, first thing, no dance, play in a bar or a place that serves alcohol, you cannot dance unless they have a special license. Now, in New York, there was 25,000 clubs at that time, and there were only 181 places you could dance. So it was not very fair. And the very sad part about it is they very strictly enforced this law. So no dancing. And the other part of the law was no drums, no saxophones. I think there was no vocalist, but I'm not sure. No trumpets, no horns, only stringed instruments. Piano and stringed instruments. So basically, the clubs were really not able to have piano-based drum trios. it was always duo, guitar and bass, or sometimes guitar, bass, and piano, or two guitars, or whatever. That was most of the clubs. Now, some clubs just kept breaking the law, and I believe what they did was they paid the police to leave them alone, because New York is and was very corrupt city, like most cities. Because I used to play it when I first moved to the city. I used to play in a club called the Onlyest Place, which was located in the old Half Note, which was a famous jazz club. And I used to play there a lot, and they allowed drums. I played there with Lee Conant's group, and they didn't have a license, I know, but somehow they were able to do it. So it was really crazy, but mostly I worked duo jobs at a place called the Surf Maid, Bradley's, the Knickerbocker, what was the other ones? Oh, Zeno's, 1/5 Avenue. These were all the places that had duos, and it was crazy because all the drummers hardly could work, and saxophone players. And even if they came by and sat in, they were breaking the law, and the club could be shut down. Now, I used to play at Bradley's a lot, and after hours, someone like Phil Woods would come in and sit in with us, or sit in with whoever was there, and the doors were closed, and they did it, and they got away with it. But they had to be very careful. So and then very recently in 2017, they just changed the law that you can dance in the clubs now in New York if they're in a certain area of the club, of the city. It's not every area, but most of the clubs now people can dance. And around I think it was somewhere in the 90s, actually a friend of mine, Warren Chason, who's a vibraphonist, was very upset because he couldn't get any jobs. They wouldn't let him play anywhere because he played the vibraphone. And so he sued the city, and actually he won, and they changed the law, and they started to allow drums and everybody in the 90s, in the 1990s. So that started opening and changing everything. So, everyone thinks, oh, New York's such a liberal city. There's a lot of very old thinking, old religious thinking, and a lot of racism. And but things are a lot better now that they allow drums and saxophones, and we can play with groups without having that very hard, and then also that license was very expensive. So that was one of the things I wanted to talk about. New York was such a different place, and I lived in a loft. Now living in a loft, I'd be bragging. Oh, I live in a loft. I mean, that's like the most expensive way to live. And but when I moved here, they would have a thing what they called a fixture fee. So which was like maybe around, everyone's different, but it was like you were basically paying for what was done in the loft. They put in plumbing, sinks, heaters. You pay for that, and then you rent the space. But my rent was $120 a month, and my loft was about 900 square feet, which you'd have to translate it into your language. But it was a good size, and lofts were just really for artists and musicians, dancers, and the place I lived in was another thing, illegal living. It was against the law to live there. When you lived in a loft, it was for commercial use, for like a store or some kind of business. But we just lived there, but it was against the law. I could go on for hours on all the things that we had to do that was illegal. We did horrible things like play music in a club. We lived in a place and without a license for living. But these were actually, you had to be careful, like if an inspector came, a city inspector, you would never let them in. It was just the way. They would ring the bell. I'm from the city, we come for inspection. We say, sorry, me no speak English. We can't let you in. Owner is not here. We don't let anybody in. So we had to be very careful. I ended up buying a co-op, but that was illegal to live there. But we had the whole building and everybody lived there. And we had to do the same thing. We had to do everything illegally. And sometimes we had to have an inspector come in, we had to do it. And basically the inspector would come in and would say, well, what about the pipes behind that wall? He would ask this question. Basically, we'd have to take money. You take $20. You go like this to the inspector and we say, well, is it okay? And then the $20 is gone. And he would say, yeah, everything is good. Yeah, this is what we did. And, there's hundreds of stories of everything illegal that we did. But that's how you lived in New York. And now lofts.
How many years?
What?
How many years ago?
This was in the 70s. Yeah. And, people now, if you own a loft, like the loft that I bought, which was $10,000. Now, unfortunately, I sold it a long time ago and moved away. Now it's worth $2 million. But I don't have it anymore. But that's what happened with New York. So people who come to New York see one thing, but when I moved to New York, it was completely different. And, part 2, I'll tell you more.
Thank you.